Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, is Blizzard afraid of difficult content? Yeah, it's kind of time for another one of those slightly, wanky video game design chatter videos, but I think they're kind of fun and I enjoy doing them. And this one definitely comes from a long time feeling that I've had, mixed in with some comments that I've seen on videos, some stuff other YouTube people have said, Twitter comments, and then talking at length with my guild. And as always, this isn't me shitting in Blizzard or anything like that, that's not the point. The point is to have a discussion. Sometimes people really seem to think I just have it in for them, and that just is not the case. I want WoW to be really good. That's kind of the goal and the desire. But anyway, let's talk about difficulty. So, many times we end up talking about the game, and it often kind of comes back to the topic of difficulty when I'm sort of discussing it with other people. And I think this has become particularly relevant with parts of patch 6.2, because the Time Walker dungeons are super easy, and I think another thing that's really spurred on this video is me doing some of the newer garrison campaigns. Between live and the PTR, I've done 4 out of the 6 possible ones on a bunch of characters, and both on characters actually with full raid gear, and characters who are around 660 and slightly under that. And in all cases, no parts of these quests put me in any peril, which I think is really a little bit sad. And what I would say is that, surely a part of being a hero is overcoming a heroic challenge, like something that you really feel like a fucking badass for actually doing. You feel cool because you've done a cool thing, rather than you feel cool because someone told you, oh hey, you did well. It's about feeling, naturally that you've done something really awesome, and I think maybe that feeling isn't as prevalent in some of the non-raid gameplay. And of course, yeah, there is raid gameplay that pretty much without fail delivers a challenging and enjoyable experience that keeps people playing the game for weeks on end. But from what I can tell, there seems to be a great degree of apathy going on in regards to not just the world content, but basically stuff that isn't a raid, and that's going on both in 6.0 and 6.2. And as much as this, I know it's not objective proof, but nearly everyone that I've talked to has reported no major uptick in guild activity outside of raids as of patch 6.2. It just seems like people don't really seem to care about the non-raid content from any perspective other than gearing. A aspect of the game that I find to be really disappointing is the scripted solo content. The likes of the Legendary Quest and the Garrison campaign, essentially. Right now, they are basically quick little 5 to 10 minute long things that give you some lore and, if we're honest, not a whole lot of gameplay. I think that's a problem when you're playing a game. And I don't really feel like it's much of a progression, and I suppose while it's tricky for an MMO to deliver a single-player experience akin to that's, a purely single-player game, I think they could do a better job of some of their single-player scripted content. Now that said, I do have some good memories from quests like this. Specifically, the trials in the Legendary Quest of Mop were very cool, as was the fight on the Isle of Thunder, and moving into Warlords, the fight with Kairos was also really cool. It was, I think, one of those times when you had pretty much a single-player, miniature raid boss. You were dealing with those balls that were bouncing up and down at the Kairos fight and doing a few other things, and that's not too far off the kind of gameplay that you might end up doing inside a raid encounter. So stuff like that, I don't think it's very hard to create, and they have the AI stuff, right, for, tanking NPCs and healing NPCs. They can do all that, and creating new encounters shouldn't be too hard given the just massive bank of abilities that they have to draw on. I would have it so that the Garrison campaign would be, a lot more difficult and a lot longer, and maybe at the end it would have an appropriate reward which would really back up that extra difficulty and extra length. Now, for an example, the Ockendun one in patch 6.2 just reeked of missed opportunity. I mean, really, I killed 15 regular mobs, a really easy mob at the end, and that was that. What? How is that the Garrison campaign? How is that the max level World of Warcraft lore? I don't think that's very good. So really not that great, nothing felt threatening, and the quest was so short that the pacing didn't really work at all, both in terms of a narrative and a gameplay standpoint. And I've done most of the rest of this campaign as well on various characters, and yeah, the same points apply there. All in all, I think these things have to be a lot more multi-staged in nature in terms of the individual quests, so that they actually would last pretty long, right? They would last long, they'd be paced better, you'd have a little bit more story and progression throughout them, and I think overall that would lead to A, better gameplay, B, a few more bosses, but more importantly, good pacing to the storyline of World of Warcraft, which I think is something that is decently important. And for those of you who are saying, well, I just want a good reward at the end, well, if these things are harder and longer, then Blizzard can justify putting an exciting reward in there. And I think having an exciting reward for the main storyline stuff of World of Warcraft, I think that's a pretty good thing. Now, tuning is, of course, a massive topic when it comes to this. How do you make something that actually makes sense and that is challenging for all players? Well, currently in most world bosses, the white damage, that's, just the regular, melee swings of a boss, is pretty small. And their ability damage is also pretty small. Their health, however, does vary a little bit. Now, I would change this system up. I would have it so that bosses overall would have larger health pools, but that their damage would be designed differently. Essentially, I would make it so that the mechanics would be properly punishing, and by shifting the difficulty to the actual boss mechanics, you make it so that the difficulty applies to all players regardless of gear level. Whether you have 250,000 health or 350,000 health, being hit for maybe 100k for failing a mechanic is not something that you really want to have happen. Now, to compensate for the ability damage being a lot higher, the regular swing damage of a boss would remain trivial. This means that gear actually plays less of an issue in a boss's difficulty, and it means the mechanics matter a lot more. I mean, difficulty design in general is quite interesting. If you want difficulty to be really coupled with people's gear, then what you're doing is you're tuning the constant throughput of a boss. So if a boss is doing 50k damage or whatever, then you're going to, or damage per second, you're going to need a, a certain level of gear to be able to deal with that, right? But if a boss is tuned so that it's got a really punishing mechanic, but if you actually deal with that mechanic well, you don't take much damage, well, it doesn't matter how much gear you have, you just need to have the actual skill yourself to deal with that, and I think that is completely reasonable. Now, another thing that I would do is make the garrison campaigns quite a bit longer. Now, you may say that doing that would take an unfair amount of time from Blizzard's development, but given what other MMOs can produce, I don't think that's really a valid reason. If a garrison campaign was maybe 40 minutes long, had the appropriate reward and the appropriate challenge, then I think it's something that personally I'd really look forward to in the game. I would say to myself, right, next week this thing will open up, it's going to be something that I can sit down, there'll be lots of voice acting, it'll be a full-on story thing, there'll be some cool scripted events, and I'll also get some challenge, I'll get some gameplay, and I'll get a really cool reward. I think that is a lot more exciting than just, oh yeah, I'll go to Auchindoun, it'll take me 10 minutes and I'll get some rep and basically some oil, hardly anything really of note. So I think that's how I'd really do it. Honestly, the current version of things just feels really rushed, which I don't like, and I think difficulty's got a big part in that. Oh, and finally, I would not have them in a random order. I think that the sort of random order of the garrison campaign has been a bit of a downgrade because it means the story often doesn't feel that cohesive. That's definitely more of a thing with the 6.0 garrison campaign, though. Now, I've already covered the legendary quest before, but I would apply the same logic to that, but with a little bit more difficulty. Rather than grinding various types of stones, I would have it so that there's actually decently hard quests that require a lot of individual skill. You would get a great reward, you get great content, and you wouldn't feel hooked into a grindy system like the one that we currently have. Because let's be honest, who enjoys grinding feckin' elemental runes? I don't think anyone does. Now, one issue that really pertains to all of this, and in fact it pertains to the entire video, is the power difference between raiders and non-raiders. Each tier brings a really large jump in gear, and raid-geared players are doing like double or maybe even triple the DPS of a non-raid geared character. And it's not just raw item levels, of course, because the raiders get their tier bonuses and they also get trinkets, which are a lot more exciting and a lot more damaging. All of this stuff means that making content that is engaging to everyone in the world and the non-raid stuff is going to be really, really tricky because you're dealing with such great variance in throughput from what all the different players can do. And this is a big challenge. I think that the content shouldn't be just like pointless lol mode for the raiders, but it also shouldn't be impossible for the non-raiders because they've got to have an awesome game to play as well. And I think my rough idea of shifting nearly all of the difficulty onto the mechanics and away from the actual raw white damage of a boss is certainly the way to go. I just think that is good for the game design, really. You don't have a great deal of control whenever it comes to unavoidable incoming damage, but you do have control over running out of the fire, interrupting something, positioning the boss, stuff like that. I also don't think that item level equates to skill, and I think it's really insulting to say that non-raiders are not capable of dealing stuff, like that. No, they are people too. They've got just as much potential to be really good players. Maybe they just don't have the time to raid or don't really feel like doing that. But does that mean they should have derp mode content? No, because they're not derpy people. Everyone's got the potential to be really good. And I think it's sort of infantilizing the way that sometimes Blizzard makes all non-raid content really derpy, because they're not derpy people. No way. I mean, hell, they could even do something where they would scale a boss's health based on item levels such that it wouldn't take a matter of seconds for a raid-geared character to destroy something, and it would still be reasonable for the non-raiders. Of course, that would only happen in something that's, a bit of instance content, like a garrison campaign. That wouldn't be for, like, Tanan. Still, it would be a bit easier in raid gear with a system like that, but perhaps something, system like that would decouple difficulty from item level just enough to make it fun for everyone. And time walking is another example of this. These may as well be the same as running those dungeons in heirlooms while leveling, and I don't think that's good. I think it's a horrendous missed opportunity. So looking through this body of content, I think that Blizzard has legitimately been afraid of putting out challenging content. And why is this? Well, none of us know for sure, but I think their actions are telling enough. They want to be extremely inclusive, and I think that is, in many ways, a laudable goal, right? It's a pretty cool thing, you include everyone, but I think the way in which they've done it has ended up with a game that just sort of is full of content that feels neutered, right? It just feels like it's not living up to its potential because they've just snipped the balls off it. I mean, sure, we get achievements and we get gear, but other than sunk cost, does it really feel great to get? It's like, yeah, I've put an hour and now I've got in some gear, or I've got some gear out of that hour that I spent, but was that a fun hour? Often I don't think it is. By making all the non-raid content very doable by absolutely everyone, they've made it so that no content is really tailored to anyone, apart from the raid content. Raiders don't feel like there's anything engaging out in the world, and I think people who don't raid end up with a world that's maybe a bit lackluster and isn't really that fun because they can't pursue challenging content on their own terms in the world. There just isn't any. Now, sure, making all of this content really easy and then stuffing it full of rewards, so there's rewards coming out of their feckin' ears, really probably does increase participation a lot. And I suspect that Blizzard sees high participation and then they're really happy about it. But in a game like World of Warcraft, I don't think participation really equals fun. Reward loops are so integral to your character's progression, and the sunk cost fallacy is so strong that people, I think, will often do stuff that they don't really enjoy for the loot. It's that scenario where, like, sure, I can spend an hour doing Tanan and maybe the Garrison campaign, or I could spend an hour in The Witcher 3. Which one's giving me more fun per hour? Now, I do think that this is leading to a sizable degree of burnout and apathy amongst the player base. It's something that I've seen, it's something that I see so many people report, so I do think that it is a real issue that Blizzard are going to have to face sometime or another. Now, another factor that's led to hard content has been lots of drama in the past, like major-ass drama. In Wrath, the dungeoning scene was actually quite strong. There was a lot of dungeons going on, even when the non-ICC ones were like super face roll. And then in response to people sort of crying out, hey, guys, these are just too easy, these are ridiculous. In response to that, what they did for Cataclysm is they made the heroics really, really, really hard. And, well, they then got mountains of feedback that this stuff was, it was too hard, it wasn't working for pugs, blah, blah, blah. Why did that happen? Well, I think it's really clear. They made fantastic content, which was tuned to an extremely fun difficulty, as far as I'm concerned, and then they put it in the wrong place. The truth of the matter was that that content just was not designed for a random dungeon system in the slightest. Lots of people complained about the symptom of the dungeons, the bad progression or success rates of those dungeons, and the problem wasn't the difficulty. The problem was where it was placed in the overall progression of the expansion. So what Blizzard did is they treated this symptom by, as I said earlier, chopping the bollocks off the darn content and making it a face roll. That meant that participation was high, that people were doing it, that success rates were high, but it also cut down on fun. The symptom was solved instead of the problem, and in doing so, we lost some really fun content from the game. I think there were great benefits to that difficulty of dungeon content, and I think that logic that Blizzard displayed with that move I think it really embodies my issue with all of the non-raid content in World of Warcraft. Now fast forward to Warlords of Draenor, and they have the systems in place, right? They have those systems to do all of that right. Grim Batal levels of difficulty, which, let's be honest, wasn't insane if you actually just followed the mechanics, but whatever, that would work in the Mythic Dungeon system. Because unlike the heroics of Cataclysm, the mythics of Warlords are in a pre-made group finder where you can choose who you're going to play with, right? That content would work now. As I said, the problem was not the difficulty of the content, it was the placement of the content. Anyone in a guild back in Cataclysm, right, or who was just doing organized pre-mades, could tell you that those, like, heroics were absolutely fucking fantastic fun, pre-nerf. And that same, like, brilliant gameplay was possible here with the Mythic Dungeon system, yet they were too scared, even though everything was set up right to allow that content to be in the game and to work really well. And I think this issue of treating the symptoms instead of the problems has led to a form of game design that can be, I think, summed up by a pretty simple phrase. They're like a dog that's chasing its tail, and maybe, well, I'd say rather a dog with the strength of an ox, with loads of plows and shovels strapped onto it, so that the more it sort of chases its tail, the deeper it digs itself. I just wish Blizzard would have the balls to climb up out of this hole and make content that's really engaging, and, you know, stuff that's not easy and air quotes safe content. No, challenging and fun content that is balanced so that it makes sense within the world, so that people have a reasonable way of progressing throughout the game. As we can see, the current way of doing things, I just don't think it's getting them anywhere good. So in summary, with the pre-made group finder existing, I think Mythic Dungeons should be of a difficulty level that's the same as the Cataclysm heroics. I think the scripted world content could do with being majorly fleshed out in terms of length, in terms of the quantity of story, the quality of story, and then the difficulty of content in the way that I covered earlier. I think Time Walkers should have been a bit harder as well, and they should have been more fleshed out. They should have like a rep or something with them that's involved in the gameplay. Now, there are also loads of other forms of brand new world content that I've got ideas for, but that's stuff for another video. But basically, to answer the question of, is Blizzard scared of adding in difficult content outside of raids? Yeah, I really think they are, and I think it's really hurting the quality, or the potential quality of the game. I even think that what we've got in Warlords of Draenor, while some of the quality of the content isn't perfect, if it was just tuned up to be a little bit harder, you know, maybe if that garrison campaign was truly something to look forward to, there was a big meaty bit of content rather than a quick little 5 to 10 minute long thing, I just think we could be in a better state for the game overall, and maybe there'd be some more content that people would really be excited about. So that's pretty much it for this discussion. Let me know what you think about the topic, especially about the kind of garrison campaign and legendary quest system. I'm really interested in seeing how they particularly could be improved. But that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching the video, everyone, and I will see you next time.